Welcome back to another episode of the Pod About God. If you notice, we're in a different setup. If you're watching on YouTube, there's some construction going on in the annex, so we had to change times. And we had some technical difficulties, so super big thank you to Dr. Brenneman for being patient with us. But like I just said, we have a special guest with us today. It's Dr. Todd Brenneman. He is the Dean of the VP Black College of Biblical Studies at Faulkner University. He is a member of the Redland Road Church of Christ in Wetumpka, Alabama. He has served over the years as an elder, a preacher, a deacon, and a Bible class teacher in the congregation in various states. He is married to his wife Jennifer, and they have one daughter, Chloe. So super impressive resume. And we're super excited to have him on today for the first reason, to answer our questions about the end of time and a little bit about the book of Revelation. And then second, which I think Kingsley will think more importantly, is to judge our first competition with ChatGPT. So I'll let Kingsley explain the rules for that.
Okay, so Dr. Brenneman, we are thrilled to have the honor of you being our first judge. We know you do a lot of grading, so we're basically asking you, and I know we talked about this before, but for the sake of everybody watching, we're asking you to grade these two answers we're about to give you based on three different criteria. But let me back up. Here's what we did, because we said we're going to clean up some stuff from last week. That's what we're doing now.
We did.
So Copeland and I had 5 minutes to produce an answer to the question we did last week, which was, will there be a rapture? The parameters are it had to be 100 words or less. We also told ChatGPT the same thing, in 100 words or less, answer this question. So the three criteria that we're looking for. One is biblical support. So which of the two answers has better biblical data to back up its claims? Two is going to be helpful, relevant information. So which of the two answers clarifies some of the issues involved and gives you an overall more comprehensive kind of answer, I guess. Okay. And then the third thing is approachability. So out of these two questions, which one of these is more kind of approachable in a conversational tone? So A, doesn't sound like it's a robot, or B, doesn't sound like too technical or too wordy or just kind of incoherent, hard to understand. So those are the rules, and that's what we're trying to grade on. Basically, if we win 2 out of 3 of these categories, we win. Okay. So we'll read the two responses, and then we'll ask you, which one has better biblical support, and you pick one or two. Okay. And if we win, we win. Now, if we lose, what's at stake is we've had college students turn in some punishments that we have to pay. Oh, wow. Some of them are hilarious. Like one of them was, I think we'd have to dress up, like one of us in a toothpaste costume and the other one in a toothbrush costume for the entirety of the next episode we record.
Shout out to Wes.
Yes. Thank you, Wes, for like 800 of those, by the way. Somebody wants us to sit in a Waffle House for 24 hours, but you gain an hour back for every waffle you eat while you're at Waffle House, which is not even really a punishment, honestly.
Kingsley thinks he could eat 24 waffles. Let us know in the comments if he could do that. I don't think he can.
I think without syrup, I could do it. I'm telling you, it might take me a few hours, and sure, I'd feel awful afterward, but I think I could do it. All right, anyway, let's cut to the chase here. So the two answers. Copeland, you want to read answer 1 or answer 2?
Yes, and these are randomized, so he has no clue which one's ChatGPT and which one's me and Kingsley. So answer number 1. In the strictest sense, no, the Bible does not teach that there will be a secret snatching away. That comes from the Latin word rapire, of Christians before the return of Christ in the final judgment. Instead, the Bible teaches one inescapable return of Jesus. We can look at 1 Thessalonians 5:2, Philippians 1:6, Philippians 9-11, Ephesians 4:30, which will be accompanied by trumpets, 1 Corinthians 15:50-57, 1 Thessalonians 4:13-18, and then the final resurrection, John 5:25, 1 Corinthians 15:50, and then the final judgment we see in 1 Corinthians 15:50, John 5:25, 1 Thessalonians 4:13-18, 1 Thessalonians 5:2, Philippians 1:6, Philippians 9-11, and Ephesians 4:30. The view of the rapture was first made popular around the 1800s, but the teaching is foreign to both the New Testament and mainstream Christianity.
That is response number 1.
Okay.
All right, we ready for response number 2?
Yes.
Copeland, if you don't mind, go ahead and read that one too.
Okay. While the term rapture is not explicitly mentioned in the Bible, passages such as 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17 and 1 Corinthians 15:51-52 have been interpreted to suggest a gathering of believers to meet Jesus in the air. However, interpretations of these passages vary widely among Christian denominations. Some view them as describing a literal event, where believers are physically taken up to the heaven before a period of tribulation, while others see them as symbolic or allegorical. The debate over the timing and nature of this event has fueled theological discussions in differing eschatological eschatological viewpoints throughout.
Okay, yeah. All right, so those are the two responses. So we'll work you through the three little pieces of the curriculum here. So one, response 1 or 2, better biblical support.
So what was the question again?
Will there be
Will
a
there be a
rapture?
rapture?
Yes, will there be a rapture?
I would say probably number 1 has
Okay.
better biblical support. It seemed like number 2 was, while they did touch on some of the important passages, was much more general about where the idea came from.
Okay.
As opposed to, that first answer, just was saturated with specific scriptures.
Okay, so that's a notch for response 1.
Okay.
Okay, category 2, which had more helpful, relevant information? So which answer better clarified or outlined the issues in hand?
I think that would probably be, I'd probably say number 1 again.
Okay.
While number 2 did again kind of say here's what the beliefs are, number 1 really focused on, right, this is what Scripture says.
Okay.
And was really kind of straight to the point of, this is, it teaches one resurrection of, both the good and the evil at the end and some other things there.
Yeah. Okay, so that's 2. So the verdict is already in. We're not going to reveal which one yet. We want to get the third category. The verdict is already in. We know, me and Copeland know who won at least.
We do.
So the third category was which one's more approachable. So I guess this one's really subjective. So this is hard to be more objective on like the other 2. But which one do you think felt more like if you were talking to somebody and they were answering naturally to the question?
Yeah, I think in that case 2 probably actually was more approachable.
Okay.
I think 1 just kind of, it was such a flood of scriptures
Okay.
that, I mean, first of all, probably if you were talking to somebody about it, you wouldn't like shotgun them with
Yeah.
with that many scriptures all in one time. But
Probably true.
but I think that 2 was the one that seemed more conversational.
Okay, so now I want to ask you this: can you guess which one seemed more Chat GPT-ish, 1 or 2? We can edit this out later if we don't like the answer.
That's tough because I haven't used ChatGPT that much.
Okay.
I've used it some. It certainly seems like 1 was probably y'all.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because it was so focused on here's the answer as opposed to here's what people think,
Yeah.
which is what more number 2 was.
Okay, well then I am happy to reveal to Dr. Brenneman and to the audience that yes, we won. 2-1, ChatGPT takes its first loss.
No punishments this week for Copeland and Kingsley.
No punishments, and look, we're not going to have any. Like we were confident in this. We didn't even like program a want button into this for loss.
Also ignore the fact that I couldn't read a couple of ChatGPT's words.
Yeah. Yeah, we agonized over how to pronounce eschatological.
That's,
Yes, and I
Before we hit
forgot.
record.
We talked about it before.
Okay, so this is a big moment. Like, this unequivocally proves that humans are smarter than ChatGPT. Is what we just figured out.
For episode 2 at least.
Yes.
We'll see how it goes further on.
Yeah, so expect more of that. I expect, like, our goal is to just clean sweep ChatGPT. We want 3 of 3. We don't want ChatGPT scoring any points on us. So we gotta get better defensively.
I do say it was kind of odd that ChatGPT was more that I perceived it as being more approachable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Out of
yeah,
all
that
those
was
three.
funny. Yeah, that's the one category I assume we're gonna win every week. But I'm glad. But I do think ChatGPT is gonna be a little bit scared to say yes or no on anything. It's gonna be more probably, politically correct in the sense of, well, here's the sides, and I'm not gonna tell you what is biblical and what's not.
Yeah, that does seem to be one of the issues with ChatGPT when it comes to theological questions, is that it tends to give here are the sides without making a determination, because however the process works at this point, it doesn't have an opinion.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like here's the facts. Which for those of you tuning in that might consider using that on an assignment in class, that's usually one of the telltale signs for an instructor that that you're using it because it is so balanced.
Shout out to Micah James if you're listening.
Not that he would ever do that.
But now that we've got through that, let's go ahead and jump into what we brought Dr. Brenneman on the podcast for. So, again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you have your Bibles and you're studying along with us this morning, we're going to start off in Matthew 24. So the first question we have for you this morning, Dr. Brenneman, is, will there be signs before the end of time? Specifically, as a Christian, should I be looking for anything in world events that points toward an imminent return of Jesus Christ?
I think one of the pieces to kind of frame a lot of that, the answer to that question, is that Jesus most often, and really other New Testament writers, when they talked about the return of Christ, more often than not referred to it as like a thief in the night or like a thief. And I think that's probably the key piece of information to form the basis for any discussion of signs. I mean, when a thief decides to rob a home, he doesn't provide the owner any sort of signs, right? Because otherwise you'd be prepared. You'd have the police there.
At least not a good thief.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the key to say, okay, when Jesus says it's going to be like a thief in the night, the idea is that there aren't going to be signs. There aren't going to be things that we can point to and say the return of Christ is imminent. And I mean, in a sense, yes, it's always imminent because it could happen at any time. But reading through news sites or watching the news and seeing all the things that are going on across the world, they're not necessarily pointing us to Jesus is going to be coming soon. I think they do point us to some things about the brokenness of humanity and the effect of sin in the world, and because of that, Jesus had to come, die for us, rose again, and he's coming back, and that's he's going to redeem us, redeem creation, but there's not going to be any specific things that we can point to say, oh, it's coming, it'll be by the end of the next year, right? Or it'll be in the next couple months.
Yeah. So when we see things, I know you mentioned like the news and all these kinds of, but I know recently it's been like the conflict in Israel, and this actually ties to what we talked about last week with the rapture. A lot of this stuff does actually, because we touched on Matthew 24, which is one of the major passages we want to discuss today. But I know in some of those premillennial views, those land promises to Israel are going to have to be literally fulfilled. And so, that not just, like in, I guess, Romans, that spiritual Israel, to borrow from the book of Romans, that kind of phrase, the promises are less to that and more to the physical Israel. And, the actual biological descendants of Abraham must have that land in order to prepare the way for Christ to return. So things like that, I think, are sort of at the heart of this question. Should we be looking for something to happen in Israel? Should we be looking for, something I think we're about to get to in Matthew 24, a phrase I think is burnt into my head of earthquakes and wars and rumors of wars, things like that, pointing to the end of time. And I do think a lot of these questions are from Matthew 24.
Yeah, Matthew 20. There are other places in the New Testament that people will point to talk about signs of the end, but Matthew 24 seems to be the one that most people will point to. It's a parallel passages in Mark 13 and Luke 21, but Matthew seems to be the one that they focus on the most. But yeah, I mean, a lot of those things with like the land promise, and there are a lot of followers of Jesus that think they should be actively working to bring peace in the Middle East, not for any desire of, right, we want to have peace as much as it is, we're setting the stage for the return of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so they've, a lot of our foreign policy over the last 4 or 5 decades has been shaped by this idea when it comes to our relationship with Israel. But, you know, when there were troubles, I know you guys aren't probably old enough to remember this. When there were troubles in the Middle East in the 90s, the first Gulf War, you know, it was the same kind of thing. Oh, this is the end of time, right? And it wasn't then. I remember going on a train trip with my parents when I was younger, and you know, somebody passing out booklets saying 88 reasons why the rapture will happen in 1988.
Yes.
You know, and so constantly there are these people saying, right, we're seeing signs for the end of time.
And I think most recent, wasn't it a few years ago, they thought it was going to be like September 23rd. Someone came out and said this is going to be the day of Christ's return. For a lot of these kinds of reasons, there's also some stuff I'm excited to ask you about from Revelation, which as much as the two of us have talked about Revelation, and I know you taught that great class to our college group as well, this is something I heard the other day from Revelation 15 in particular. I'm interested to see your take on when we get there. But so we figured we'd do this way, that we would work through some of these sections in Matthew 24 first, and just raise any questions as we move forward that me and Copeland might have for you. So what we want to do first is just move through the text of Matthew 24, and we've got this sectioned off. Basically, they match up with the headings in the Bible. So we want to start with verse 3, and we want to read through verse 14. It's kind of a lot to read, but this is that section with the wars, rumors of wars, those kinds of things. So, Copeland, if you don't mind, can you take us through Matthew 24, verses 3 to 14?
Yes. I'm going to read kind of quick so we can keep it going. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciple came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of age?" And Jesus answered them, saying, "See that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another, and many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved, and the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come."
Okay, so I think our main questions here are, should we be looking for that list of things to happen? And you've pretty much already answered this in general, but so in particular, false prophets and people saying, I am the Christ. And this obviously would be married to that idea of the Antichrist, of one figure coming in and exalting himself in that kind of role. So should I be looking out for a bunch of people who are claiming to be Christ that are actually false alongside wars and like earthquakes, hurricanes, natural disasters? When I see those things on the news, does my radar need to go up? Okay, well, I better straighten my life out now because things are, if there's anything out there that I haven't done yet I want to do, I need to get it done. Or, so what's Jesus talking about here if he's not giving us a laundry list of signs for the end of time?
Well, I think that when we look at this passage in its context and follow some of the things that Jesus says here, I think it clears up some of the confusion. Let's start off first with, if these are signs of the end, these are probably some of the worst signs ever.
Okay.
When have you not heard of wars and rumors of wars and earthquakes and famine?
Yep.
If Jesus is giving signs of the end, it doesn't seem like these are very good signs. Because, and sometimes people will say, oh, well, they're going to be worse before the end. Well, how would you know that?
Yeah.
This is the worst it's ever been. Well, how do you know it's the worst it ever will be? Right? So, the fact that the signs themselves aren't that great of signs
Yeah.
kind of says, these probably aren't signs. But additionally, in Jesus says in verse 4, see that no one leads you astray, or see that no one deceives you. And then goes on to say, you're going to hear about all of these things. In other words, these aren't the signs. He's explicitly saying, these aren't the signs. These aren't good signs. Don't look at these things and think, oh, something's going to happen. Right? He's specifically telling them that. And so for us to take them and say, oh, these are signs of the end, when Jesus really sets out and says, these aren't signs.
Yeah. So all these things take place, and then the end is, off in the future after that kind of a thing.
Yeah,
at the end of that section.
I mean, you look at the that last verse there in verse 14. The gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Well, I mean, I believe it's Colossians, chapter 1.
Paul says something very similar towards,
Yeah, and he says, Colossians chapter 1, verse 23, if indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven. Right? So in a sense, Paul's saying, right, it's been proclaimed everywhere. So, it does kind of immediately start leading us, it should lead us to question, right, are these signs? The second thing that I think is important is to say, okay, what question is Jesus answering?
Yeah.
Because people will take this passage and they'll start talking about signs of the end, but they don't ask the question, okay, what's he answering? What's he answering? Well, in verse 3, right, tell us when these things will be. What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So, what do the disciples mean when they say, when will these things be? We kind of have to go back a couple verses earlier to the beginning of chapter 24. In the first verses in 24, Jesus, they're going through the temple, Jesus and the disciples are pointing out to Jesus all these great buildings, and how magnificent it is. And Jesus says in verse 2, you see all these, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. That's when they ask, when will these things be? So what's he talking about? He's talking about the destruction of the temple. Right? And so he's telling them these are the things that are not signs of the destruction of the temple, and they're certainly not signs of the destruction of the world, the end of time. But ultimately what he's telling them is, right, that at some point the temple's going to be destroyed, Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. And so we need to kind of keep that in the forefront of our mind when reading Matthew 24.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a really good. I think you wound up answering a lot of our other questions.
Do we want to go into the next few signs, or just
I'm gonna leave that up to you over there.
Well, I think there are some other things that the abomination, the desolation, and
Yeah,
That was one we
verse-
definitely flagged.
verse
So
15 through 28?
So Matthew 24, I know Copeland, we talked a lot about this, several times
We
over the
have.
course of our discussions. But so Matthew 24, how do I navigate what is like destruction of Jerusalem kind of stuff with anything that might be end of time? Because, we do have that section towards the end of the chapter of, concerning that day and hour, no one knows, not even the Son. So how do I know what in this chapter, and to me, Matthew 24 can be one of the most difficult chapters to interpret properly because of this. I think you nailed it when you mentioned, what kind of end is he talking about? Is it the end of the age, as in our current age before the kingdom is inaugurated, in basically in Acts chapter 2 with the arrival of the Holy Spirit there? Or is that the end of the age, or is the end of the age like the end of all, like, human history as we know it. And I know, Copeland, we had a lot of questions about, what is that abomination of desolation? There's that tribulation starting in verse 29. The sun and the moon are darkened, the stars fall out of the sky, all those things. And then especially at the end with this idea that, one will be taken and one will be left. Two men will be out in the field, two women grinding at the mill, one's taken and one's left, all that kind of stuff. So the questions really all circle around those different signs. But yeah, Copeland, anything to clarify from that before we turn Dr. Brenneman loose on those things? Did you have any more thoughts, or does that summarize our conversation well?
That summarizes our thoughts perfect. So I say we just turn it
Okay.
loose.
So I think that there's the transition that takes place is verse 34.
Okay.
When he says, "This generation will not pass away until all these things take place." So everything he's been talking about, right? Verse 34 is kind of the break, right? And specifically this idea of this generation is going to be here and not pass away, not cease to exist until everything has taken place that he's been talking about. And then in verse 36, it seems like he's shifting, right? But of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father only, right? So everything from verse 34 to the beginning of the chapter I think are a conceptual unit. Right? He's talking about one specific idea, which kind of brings us back to the abomination of desolation, which is from Daniel chapter 9. And it's in the context of Gabriel telling Daniel about this period of 70 weeks, and that there's going to be an abomination of desolation. And most, I would say, most Christians would say, well, there's things in there that are talking about when is the Messiah going to come? When is Jesus going to come? And so here is this warning that there's going to be an abomination that brings desolation, right? There's this terrible thing, right? Something unclean, something unholy that is going to occur. And Jesus basically tells them in verse 15, that's the sign. Right? When you see this,
Okay.
this is when it's going to take place. Now remember, we're before verse 34. So we're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. So when you see the abomination of desolation, that's when you know that the time is near. And so the question then becomes, okay, well, what's this abomination of desolation? Well, Daniel doesn't really help us.
Yeah.
But if you look at the parallel passage in Luke, it's Luke chapter 21 and verse 20. Right? It's the same context. Jesus has been talking about all these things that are going to take place. And then he says in verse 20, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation has come near." Right? So the warning is, you're going to see the armies, and I think the armies here of Rome, are going to be ready to lay siege to Jerusalem. And when you see that, that's the time to get out of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right? And so he talks about, flee to the mountains. He says, don't go back in the house. It's going to be terrible for women and children. Pray that it doesn't be it's not on the Sabbath. I mean, if it's signs of the end, what's it matter if it's on the Sabbath or not?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But if it's talking about, the city that you're in is going to be destroyed, well, I mean, there's some of those traditions, the law about the Sabbath and how far you could journey on the Sabbath. Certainly, if it's in winter, it's going to be a lot more difficult for women and children to travel.
Yes.
So all of these things Jesus is warning them right? The abomination of desolation is they're going to destroy the temple. And who's going to destroy the temple? The Romans are going to destroy the temple.
Yeah.
And what the Romans are going to do is going to desecrate it, much like what happened with prior to the Maccabean revolt.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you see that taking place, get out, right? It's time to flee. That's the sign, but it's the sign of the destruction of Jerusalem.
I think that's really helpful, and I think that grounds the whole discussion
Mm-hmm.
in Matthew 24. And that really, I guess, segues nicely into this next set of questions because we are kind of getting close to time here. And so, it's real easy to answer some questions from Revelation.
Just simple stuff.
Yeah, super easy stuff. So I do think that leads in well because, we have that abomination of desolation. And we have also in Matthew 24 and in Luke, right after the verses you read, these signs in the heavens. Okay, so like things that you're going to see. And it sounds more, this is familiar language from the Old Testament. So I'm a firm believer that the better we know our Old Testament prophets, the less scared we are and intimidated by navigating things like Revelation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Matthew 24. Anything Day of the Lord kind of stuff makes more sense.
Yeah.
With some Old Testament prophecy loaded in there. So specifically in Revelation, and listen, Copeland has got a long list of questions about Revelation that he can hit you with, but I think he's reining himself in. He's limited to just, like several dozen on our list here. But so Copeland, you're in complete control here of, do you want some of these deeper questions with a long answer, or do you want to go rapid fire? I'm leaving that up to you.
How much time are we looking at? Do we know?
You're looking at, I'd say, another 5 minutes, but 10 minutes maximum if you want to push people's patience here. But you're at 31 minutes where you sit right now.
Well, I'd love to hear the one that really appeals to me is the whole astrology one that you mentioned in Romans 12. And if we have time for that, I don't know how deep of an answer will be given. And then maybe we can hit a couple rapid fire like Dr. Todd, you give us 30-second answers. Just super shallow so we can hear something neat. But Kingsley, if you want to go in for your Revelation 12 question, I'd love to hear that one discussed.
Okay, yeah. So this is the one I mentioned earlier, and I misspoke. I said 15. What I meant to say was 12. So this image of a great sign appearing in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. So what I hadn't heard prior to this weekend was apparently there's this whole argument when people do try to peg a certain date, they will base that on astronomy. So like the constellations that would have been associated with the ancient Near Eastern views, from the Old Testament that they're then reading as bearing continuity here in Revelation in the New Testament era. So they'll say, we're looking for a certain alignment of the planets, and they have nailed down the star at the birth of Christ, which is obviously relevant here because you have like the Christ child being born in this section. So they have nailed down that star to Jupiter as, we're looking at the constellations in the sky. And so they'll say, we need to be ready for the planets to align in these ways. And Revelation is clear cut. It tells you exactly what to look for. So when you see this constellation, then this is the time of the end. And they sort of marry that to like in Revelation 15. And that's where the bowls of wrath, or is it the trumpets?
Bowls of wrath.
It's the bowls of wrath. Okay.
You want me to read the 1 through 6?
Yeah, if you don't mind, in Revelation 12 or 15, what you going to read?
I think 12. 12?
Okay.
Or which
12.
one? Is that the one you want?
Yeah, let's do 12.
1 through 6.
Yep, 12, 1 through 6.
All right. And a great sign appeared in heaven, and a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and crying out in birth pains, in the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and on his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was called up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness, and she has a place prepared by God in which she is said to be nourished for 1,260 days.
So should we be expecting, or should I listen to, like the next time someone comes out with a book or, gets on the news saying Jesus is returning on this exact day because either the calendars or because of the sky, what should I listen to him or not?
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to Matthew 24 and letting Matthew 24 give us some guidance there. in 24 and 25, Jesus tells four parables that all have the same message. Be ready, for you do not know the day or the hour. Right? I mean, that 4 times. Jesus wanted to make sure everything was clear. You do not know the day nor the hour. And I think that using this passage and trying to use, you said astronomy, but I think we're actually talking astrology.
Okay.
Right? I mean, that's more astrology than it is astronomy.
Yeah, I will confess I have no idea what the difference is between those two words.
I said the wrong word at the beginning.
Those are the same thing in my mind.
Yeah, no, so astronomy is a scientific exploration of space and the stars and star movements, and constellations are certainly a part of that. But
Okay.
astrology is the assumption that by looking at the heavens, we can know about future events. Right, so it's not.
Okay.
I mean, it's not really scientific at all. If anything, it's kind of a pseudoscience. And to think that God would use that kind of information, I think, kind of goes against the entirety of Scripture. And here, like you said, if you know your Old Testament, right, that's going to help you understand so much of Revelation. And simply by the fact of like the 1,260 days, right, at the very, very end of this, the numbers in Revelation, which some people get so focused on, which 666, I'll mention it, we're not going to talk about it anymore.
I don't know. I think Copeland has that on the list.
No.
That might be a later podcast because that's more than a 30-second answer. So 1,260 days is 3.5 years with a 30-day month, which is half of 7. And 7's the number representing perfection or completeness in Revelation. Right? So the number symbolic. You have the dragon. John tells us a few verses later, the dragon Satan. So it says it says dragon, but it means Satan.
Yeah.
Right? The idea of the stars, the moon, the sun, you go back to Joseph's dream. Right, that he said, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me, and Jacob rightly recognizes that the symbolism there is kind of like of authority, right? And so the idea here is this woman has some authority, has some power, has some importance there, and what we're seeing here, I would say, is more like the gospel in a very condensed format, in a very different way, a very symbolic way.
That would have made sense to us if we were living as first century Jews in Palestine or in Asia here in this case for the 17th.
Yeah, I think that that this you have to put Revelation in that first century context. It was not written to us; it was written to them. Yeah. And it was written to address the persecution they were facing. How does telling them, don't worry, you're persecuted now, but thousands of years from now, there'll be other events that will signify the end of the world, so be comforted. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm comforted now, right? Still I'm losing my job. I don't have any money for my family to eat, but thanks for that tidbit about the end of time.
Yep.
But more along the lines that you're going to be persecuted now, but stick with it because it's worth it.
Yeah, and that God has this plan that is reflected in the coming of Jesus, right? His birth here, and then his ascension, right? It's all condensed, and that Satan is cast out of heaven, right? That Satan doesn't have Satan's the accuser. He doesn't have a place in heaven anymore to accuse us before God. Yeah, right? Because of and so that's the message here of chapter 12. Now he's angry about that, and he's going to fight back about that, and he's going to attack Christians because of that. But this isn't look to the skies because when you see that constellation, it's going to mean the ends to come. Thief in the night. All right.
Okay, got it. So don't listen to the guy who says Jesus is coming back on this particular day in this particular year.
Yeah, I think that it's very. It's very arrogant to try and say we've pegged the date when Jesus himself said
Yeah.
I don't even know the date. The
Yeah.
angels don't know the date.
Yeah.
But you in the 21st century have somehow figured this out.
Yeah.
That's a little bit prideful and arrogant to me.
Yeah, that's my main problem with it, because Jesus says, well, in Matthew 24, not even the Son knows that day or hour. And it's like, okay, well, Jesus doesn't know, but this random guy does. Like, that didn't really compute.
Random Joe from Silicaga
Yeah.
knows when.
Yeah.
And usually
He's from Silicaga. He's got to be. Copeland has some kind of deep-seated problem with Silicaga we'll get into later. Listen to the next episodes.
It's just a random city.
But it's
Okay, got it.
usually, you got to take these numbers from this verse here and then from over here, and you have to multiply them in one case and add them in another. And like, well, where are you getting all these formulae that pull all these things together?
I think you've pretty well addressed our major questions about the signs, and because I think that term sign or signs it's really kind of used sparingly in Revelation, isn't it? It doesn't show up a ton. And when it does, it's usually like there's a sign that appeared in heaven, and it's kind of so astronomy. Is that am I using the right word now?
That's a scientific.
Okay, so astrology is the one that's not, which is weird because you'd think the ology one is more scientific.
Yes.
Okay, so that's backwards.
Yes.
Perfect. That should make sense to me then. So anything like that, I think what will be latched onto is that sign in heaven for astrology. They're looking for, okay, this is now telling me something in the heavens. But I think you've pretty well.
Yeah, and then there's also that passage in Matthew that we didn't get to about the sun turning to darkness, the moon turning to blood.
Yeah.
Right, and so there's all this assumption that there's going to be these great signs in the heavens. But when you look at that passage, like you said, if you understand your Old Testament, right, you go back to Joel chapter 2, and Joel has this prophecy, right? The sun's going to turn to darkness and the moon turn to blood before the great and coming terrible day of the Lord, and people are going to see visions and have dreams, and the Spirit's going to be poured out. And Peter says on Pentecost, this is this fulfillment.
Yeah.
Right? And so when you see all this language about, sun turning to darkness and moon turning to blood and the heavens quaking and all those things, it doesn't mean literal signs. It means that it's referring to monumental changes that are taking place.
Okay.
Like Pentecost was with the inauguration of the church and the work of the Spirit.
Yeah. Okay. Man, well, I feel very good about the answer we have to this question.
I do too.
And I think what we'll do is, Copeland, me and you will play according to our rules here.
Yes.
So me and you, at some point between now and the next episode, based on our conversation with Dr. Brenneman. So Dr. Brenneman is the input, into our chat GPT that we use to then form our answer. So we'll have 100 words. We'll write our answer. We have to do that in 5 minutes. We only get 5 minutes to do it because we want to simulate someone being able to sit down and just type it and get an answer quickly. We want to make it conversational. So Copeland and I will have 5 minutes, 100 words or less. We'll polish up an answer. We can edit it after those 5 minutes, but we can't add more content.
Right. Okay.
All the arguments are in at 5 minutes, but we can obviously clean up a little bit of the grammar here and there.
Right. Yeah.
And then next week we'll get another judge to weigh in and tell us if we, based on your input, if we can defeat ChatGPT again. But listen, I'm still not programming like a failure sound into this thing. We're not going to lose. And I know it's going to come back to bite me when we if we do.
Kingsley needs to be humbled.
ChatGPT is really good for some stuff, and it would absolutely wipe the floor with us with certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're asking, I think you mentioned at the beginning, it's just not built to be able to answer these kinds of questions, which is where my confidence is coming from. It's not that we're so smart. It's just that ChatGPT, and I hope for our college students listening, and really just anybody else, that, look, you can't turn to ChatGPT to ask it these kinds of questions and then expect to have a really good answer. Now, it can arm you with some new information.
True, yeah.
And it can, I guess, based on who's inputting the information it's pulling from. But most of the time, it'll give you some pretty accurate info. But you guys just saw pretty clearly how, Dr. Brenneman, you were able to recognize off the cuff which one was ChatGPT and which one was not. Actually, Braden recognized that too. We tested it on him before. And so it's not that hard to recognize, and it's because of the different nature of the answers. And so when you have these kind of questions, ask somebody that you trust. If you want to look at ChatGPT to kind of give you some information, that's fine. But when you're looking for a reliable answer to these things, a human is going to be better right now. And so that's why I'm confident. It's not so much that we're just so smart and we can beat the computer. The computer's just not made for this kind of stuff. So, Copeland, I'd say you got like 2 minutes if you want to do some rapid fires over there
2 minutes
to
all
close
right.
out.
We'll try to go through. We'll try to go through one or two, Dr. Brenneman.
All
So
right.
short, basic answer. First question. So we know Revelation was written to 7 different churches in Asia. Asia is a big continent. How was that one book of Revelation spread out throughout those 7 churches? Were there copies made? Did they pass it back and forth? So basically, do we know anything about that?
Yeah, we don't know anything about that. The only thing we do know is that all the manuscripts that have been found of Revelation have all 7 letters. So, I mean, you might think, well, it would be like chapters 4 through 22, and then you throw Ephesus on there, and they send that one to Ephesus and Philadelphia. But none of the manuscripts that we've found have been like that. It's quite possible that there was just one copy, and then messengers took it from Ephesus to Smyrna, to Thyatira, to Pergamum, and went around like that. But we don't have that information.
All right, question number 2. Let me pull it up. Who are the 24 elders spoke about in Revelations 4? And I can read the passage for you real quick. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones were 24 elders, clothed in white garments and golden crowns on their heads.
Yeah, so like everything in Revelation, there's so many different views about the representation. I think the one that makes the most sense to me is that they are some type of symbolic representation of the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles, right? And it's kind of they're kind of bringing the Old Testament, New Testament together. That's the one that seems to make the most sense to me, because of the all-encompassing nature of that answer compared to in the Old Testament. In the Hebrew version is basically 24 books. I mean, we have it at 39 because Samuel's broken up, etc. And so some people say, what's the 24 books or the 24 authors of the Old Testament? That to me doesn't seem to be as all-encompassing as what Revelation is. So the 12 apostles, 12 tribes, seems to me to be the best that is connected there somehow.
All right. Okay. And then last question. Battle of Armageddon.
Battle of Armageddon.
Has it already happened? Is it going to happen in the future? Is it going to be a physical battle? Just a quick little overview.
The Battle of Armageddon isn't going to happen.
Okay.
You look at Revelation chapter 16, and everybody gathers, and the 7th bowl is poured out, and that's it. There's no battle. Right?
Yeah. The angel, doesn't he say, like, it is finished?
Yeah.
Or like it's done?
It's done.
They all show up. This is a hilarious picture in my mind because it's all the bad guys. They roll up. They're ready to find, like, Gog and Magog are there.
Well, that's later on. That's later on.
Well, if it's like that cycle, or if it's like the same image described different times, I guess they could potentially be. But, like, everybody's there. They line up to fight, and then the angel just shows up and is like, all right, guys, it's over. Like, we're not even going to fight. I love that image. It's pretty funny to me.
And I think what it represents in the larger story of Revelation is these 2 beasts that John talks about in Revelation 13, which represent, and again, we don't have time. I could go into this more detail about why I believe this, but representing the Roman Empire and the cult of emperor worship. And that's going to be destroyed from the standpoint of those first century Christians. And so that's what Armageddon is representing, the God destroying those people that are persecuting his people. Not some type of last-ditch battle at the end of time, which, again, would be a sign.
Yeah. Shields.
It has nothing to do with Bruce Willis.
It has nothing to do with Bruce Willis.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Or a giant asteroid from outer space.
Would most of the people that would listen to this podcast get that reference?
I tried it last week with Skynet. I don't know if anybody would have got that either. So go Google the movie Armageddon, and you'll get the joke there. I will say it was very nice to hear you say earlier, both of you guys might be too young for this reference. As somebody that's constantly around college students in their 30s, it's nice for someone to tell me I'm young instead of super old.
All I can say is I'm getting old if I'm getting put in the same boat as Kingsley.
Yeah, have some. Yeah, welcome. Yeah, you just graduated, man. You're now officially an adult.
But Kingsley, do we know next week's topic? Are we going to go down the list with the third one, or are we going to push it back?
It's up to you, man.
If we
You're the
do,
producer.
If we do, the next podcast to come out will be how do I discuss the gospel, specifically with loved ones in my family that may disagree with me, that may not be believers at all. So stay tuned for that. But Dr. Brenneman, we can't thank you enough for coming on.
Absolutely. Really, we'll give you the applause track.
Thank you for having me.
Enjoyed it. Yes, sir. We enjoyed it. Kingsley, anything to end on?
I don't think so. I'm very excited about this. I really appreciate the time that you took. And as Copel mentioned, it took us a minute to get set up because we had to move. So Dr. Brennan was very patient with us with that. And we just appreciate your time. We know you're a busy guy, so thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you guys for watching, and tune in next week for How Do I Share the Gospel with Family Members.